Hello everybody, welcome to More Chainsaws Needed, where, because I love horror, thrillers and suspense, I am going to talk, rant, rave about, review and recommend movies, TV series and books in those genres for you guys as I draw. We're done with the original Universal monsters who gave us a lot of thrills and screams for years. But of course, time moved on, and while we still get from time to time movies about the original Frightful Five, with diverse degrees of qualities, horror changed a lot in the 40s and 50s. So we're going to move on to 5 specific movies, not in chronological order, that were later remade into what are now considered incredible cult classics of the 80s, and some got very, very bad sequels. We're going to start with one that has been remade so many times it even has a couple of porn parodies. Based on a novel that many people have even forgotten it existed, and yet has managed to become part of our lexicon under the question, do I have to look for pots under your bed? Whenever people act out of character. That's right, we're going to delve headfirst into the original black and white film from 1956 that brought us the fear of sleeping, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Horror has always had a very close relationship with science fiction, given that both genres taught the fears and hopes of a generation. And also both genres were invented by women, but that's a different story for a different day. So of course it was pretty normal for studios to get inspiration from sci-fi novels for their horror movies, even if the movie ended up being a bit different or a lot different from the book. Or a completely different story, but that's for later. In any case, in 1955, the world was barely getting back together after World War II, when there was a new war starting in Vietnam, and of course Russia and the USA began what would end up becoming the Cold War. It was a time where paranoia ran rampant, and everyone in America was afraid that their neighbor next door was a Russian spy. It's in this particular situation when Jack Finney wrote The Body Snatchers, a novel about a strange invasion to the little town of Mill Valley in California, where seeds from outer space grew into pods that later replaced asleep humans with perfect duplicates with all their knowledge, but unable to have any feeling. While the new duplicates only live 5 years and can't reproduce sexually, the implication is that they will turn the Earth into a dead planet, and once they have used all the planet's resources, will move on to the next one the same way they arrived to ours, by floating spores into space until they find another place to invade. Of course, the originals completely disappear or are destroyed. We don't never know what happens to the originals in this case, and actually I don't think we ever find out in any movie. Anyway, that we can read like 5 different metaphors and allegories to what we humans are doing actually to our planet right now, it's completely a feature and not a bug. The whole original novel is a criticism towards how we humans act among ourselves, just painted with an extra sci-fi patina. While the novel itself had a lukewarm receptions due to the inaccurate science of it, when really, scientists, come on. It's a novel about pods from outer space replacing humans. Why are we caring about the possibility of spores traveling through space and not the replacing humans while they're asleep and disappearing their bodies somehow without even touching them? The thing is, at the same time, it inspired some of the creepiest horror movies of all times. And yes, I am talking here about both the 56 movie that we are going to talk about and the remake of the 70s. But we will get to that later. Enter Monogram Pictures. If you have never heard from them, it's perfectly understandable. They were part of the smaller studios known as Poverty Row, a collective of small and short-lived studios who produced a lot of low-budget films from the 20s to the end of the 50s. Poverty Row was also used to refer to their films, which means that the term was pretty much the precursor to a B film. In fact, the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the movie that we're talking about today, was a B film, released in tandem with the much less remembered Atomic Man. But I digress. let's talk a bit about the plot for Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956. Dr. Hill, a psychiatrist in Los Angeles, is called upon to meet a man who is held in custody. This man is our protagonist, Dr. Miles Bennell, who a couple of weeks before had been working as a doctor of Santa Myra and kept getting patients that insisted that their relatives had been replaced by identical looking impostors, only to change their mind a couple of days later because, oh, come on, Uncle Ben not being Uncle Ben, that's completely silly, Doc. At first, he thinks it's just a case of collective hysteria, but then his friend Jack Belia calls him because he found a dead body with no facial features or fingerprints in his house. And Miles goes, checks it, and yeah, that's a body without any face or fingerprints, until Jack falls asleep and the body starts to change into Belicic's face. Invasion of the Body Snatchers was not planned to be an important movie for the studio, and I cannot emphasize that enough. Even from day one, the producer, Walter Wagner, was asked by Allied Artists Pictures to keep the budget $100,000 less than what he had originally planned for, and slashing the shooting time from 24 days to 20 days, showing once again how many studios saw and still see horror as the easy, cheap option to make movies that will bring back money easily enough. The lower budget meant that Wagner could not use any of his first choices for the main characters because he would run out of money. So he got Kevin McCarthy for the role of Dr. Miles, having been impressed by his role as Viv Loffman in Death of a Salesman in 1951, and Dana Winter for Becky Driscoll, his dumb lover. Although both of them had long careers after the movie, their best-known role would forever be Invasion of the Body Snatchers, even as later on the 1978 adaptation became the most known by the public. Just like with casting, every other choice was made to save money. For example, instead of filming in the actual town used by Finlay in the novel, Mill Valley, they used location in Los Angeles that could pass for maybe a town like Mill Valley, creating the whole new town of Santa Myra for the film. Creating it in paper, it was Los Angeles. They did end up filming overshadowed for 3 days due to trying to film at night for some key scenes, and later because the studio demanded a framing story for the whole film that would change the ending from a chilling scene that implied that the alien invasion would continue uninterrupted to a far more hopeful ending, because 50s needed more hopeful endings. The original reaction of the public has been lost to the times, because while Wagner insisted that the previews were very successful and people were very impressed by his film, Don Siegel and Daniel Mike Warning, who directed and wrote the screenplay respectively, claimed otherwise, insisting that the mix of black comedy with horror didn't quite work and that the audience was both confused and locked in at the worst possible moments, which made the studio cut as much as they could in order to avoid the humorous parts, because horror comedy was not in the wheelhouse of Allied Artists Pictures, and Wagner disagreed completely, as he insisted that it made the movie lose a lot of his humanity, which, let's be honest, is quite ironic, considering that the subject matter of human losing their humanity to aliens just to preserve the status quo, aka conformity, is the whole point of the story. More or less. We will talk about that. Speaking about conformity, I mentioned that the framing device of Dr. Miles being interviewed after escaping Santa Mira, informing the authority of what was happening, was a perfect example of conformity to the studio demands. Neither Siegel nor Wagner wanted that framing device. They both wanted to end the movie with the terrified Dr. Miles screaming in horror as he saw trucks that were carrying pots to go all over the United States, spelling doom for the human race. Why the studio didn't want that ending? Well, by then, sad endings didn't sell. They wanted an uplifting ending that would leave audiences entertained and ready to spend more money. When it became obvious that the movie would not be distributed without this happy capitalist ending, Wagner had to beg Siegel to film it in order to protect the film and made it reach the audience. And now that is us. Ironically, sometimes when shown on TV now, in order to make room for commercial breaks, stations choose to cut what they could and keep the story intact. Which meant, of course, that the prologue and the epilogue were cut, making it possible to see the movie in the director's cut to speak, as long as it was supported by more capitalism. And now that is irony. There have been tons of words written about what the invasion of the Body Snatchers intended to say. Some people say that this was a warning about how the USA was becoming too comfortable in the post-war and warned of the dangers of following McCarthy and the paranoia around communism. Some other people, watching the exact same movie in the exact same cut, insist that no, it's the other way around. The movie is a warning against communism and the loss of individualism if the Soviet unit managed to conquer USA. Yeah, but readings are actually possible depending on if you count the prologue epilogue or you don't. So let's start with the issue of McCarthyism. If you take out the bookend sequence, we have a story of paranoia sweeping into every tiny town of America. Either you conform to what the government says you need to conform to, or you are the enemy. As we conform, as we just listen and do what we are told and tell on our neighbors who are not conforming, we lose a little bit of our humanity. If everybody conforms, all that there will be left is a pantomime of humanity. Here's where I make a pause to say that, in the original story, there was an extra layer of alienness to the pod people besides their lack of emotion. They also didn't do the things that we do for mere enjoyment, like gardening or fixing the house or singing or creating art. We will come back to that in future remakes. However, that reading about McCarthyism is impossible to sustain when we have the bookend sequence. After all, in that sequence, the government comes in and takes care of the pods, saving the human race and the American way of life. Or at least we are assuming that they are going to come and take care of the silent invasion and everything will be alright. We not know, but it's the implication. Which means that yes, with the bookends, invasion of the Body Snatchers justifies the paranoia of the McCarthy's era. Yes, your neighbors are being taken over by the communists. Yes, there is a silent invasion of your town that is destroying your loved ones, your way of living and your individuality, and you need to let the authorities know of every little change that happens around you. If you see something, say something! Don't let the communists invade our tiny little towns and act before it's too late! And does that sound insane? Of course it does. But it's a valid reading of the material if you count the era when it was made. Or, well, it's a valid reading as long as you subscribe to the death of the author and don't ask the people involved, as everyone who has a thing to say about the movie, from the producer to the writer of the original novel, has been recorded as to say, nope, there are no politics involved in the story, it's just a science fiction horror thriller about deadly plants from outer space. Please stop adding subtext to it that it doesn't exist. It's just humans versus plants. As easy as that. There is a reason why Invasion of the Body Snatchers became such a classic. And it was mostly true with the plot, and how yes, the paranoia message could be read by everyone in their own personal way. But no matter if you think it's anti-communism or anti-American government, there is one thing that is clear. Not just in this, but in all the subsequent remakes, that we will talk about in the future as I told you. What makes us human, what makes us unique, are our emotions. And those can't be duplicated. So yes, we should probably protect our arts, our hobbies, and everything we love that makes us, well, us. I want to thank my dear patrons Mitch Hyman, Elaine Ho, Jessic, Ellie Riley, and Richard Philip Leo, as well as my first supporter Tanya Pineda and the most amazing Amy Sung, without whom none of my videos would be possible. I also want to remind you that if you want to support these and my other projects and get your name mentioned here, you can do so at patreon.com/Adalisa, read a link on description because I know my name can be a pain to spell, and with just $1 a month, you will always be thanked in my videos as well as get access to a ton of art before anyone else, and get the chance to suggest future subjects for videos. You can also support me through Ko-fi, and for each coffee, you will get mentioned in 3 future videos. If you can't support me this way, I also accept likes, subscriptions to the channel, and of course, you sharing the links. I also welcome all your questions, feedbacks, and suggestions in the comments below. This was Adalisa Zarate, and remember, there is not a problem in the horror genre that cannot be solved with more chainsaws and a cup of gut coffee.